welcome to my tutorial for R-Type Delta for the PlayStation. This is going to be on the normal difficulty setting. And I recommend using the ship you see me starting out with, the R13. There's going to be some boss strategies, especially that I'm going to be using with that ship. That's going to be specific to that ship. This ship has an anchor ability on the little pod that it has, which means it can anchor onto the bosses and destroy them. It's extremely useful for taking out bosses. It makes some of the bosses pretty easy, so I would definitely recommend that ship. But yeah, this game took me around 9 hours and 29 minutes to beat. It's pretty damn hard, even for an R-Type game. I probably found it harder than R-Type 3, R-Type Leo, and R-Type Final, which were the main installments that I completed in the past. Though it was a while ago, so my memory is not that clear on how difficult exactly they were. But I may have beaten some other versions of R-Type games, maybe on Game Boy or some shit like that, but those are usually pretty easy. But those are the main ones I remember beating. The first thing you're going to want to do is unlock free play mode, which you get for putting in 6 hours of gameplay time. Now, if you want, you can just play the game for 6 hours normally and unlock it that way. But to me, I considered that a waste of time. I'd rather just start it out with unlimited continues and just beat the game checkpoint by checkpoint. So I recommend to unlock that without even having to play the game, all you need to do is set the X button on your controller to rapid or auto fire, and set it down, and it'll keep starting the game, and you'll keep dying, but you'll be racking up time. So all you got to do is leave the game running. So set it on auto fire, just leave the game running. If you have an emulator, use the fast forward function on the emulator to unlock free play in about 2 hours or so, depending how fast the fast forward function is. So, if you don't have auto fire and you just have rapid fire, then, you can tape the button down. As long as the button is constantly firing, it will keep running through the menus and keep starting up the game, and then you'll keep dying. And eventually you will rack up that 6 hours. So I recommend doing that first. Leave the game on and do that. If you don't have a rapid fire controller, or you're not playing on an emulator, then you will have to just play the game for 6 hours, which you will learn in the game anyway, but I just find it better just to start off with the unlimited continues. Most R-Type games gave you unlimited continues at default, but in this one you have to earn them, which is really not earning them, you just have to put in time. So yeah, make sure you do that and pick this ship. I recommend playing on an emulator because it's very helpful to be able to save and load states to practice bosses and various sections to get them down. So I do recommend playing on an emulator, but it's not necessary. But it'll probably take you longer if you're not able to practice the bosses. Especially the last boss is extremely difficult, especially without being able to practice it isolated. It'd be very difficult. So I really don't recommend playing it that way unless you don't have a choice. But if you have a PC, you can probably run PlayStation emulation. So yeah, this guy you don't have to kill. This is just something you basically just dodge, but you can kill it if you want. You just have to destroy that center part of it with the little motor in it or whatever the hell that is. But you'll see how this pod really destroys bosses. You can just anchor it into the boss and really destroy them. There's also a speed increase and speed decrease button on the controller. I like to keep my speed at 3 for pretty much the whole game. I find that to be the most balanced speed that I'm comfortable with. The faster speed is a little bit too twitchy for me, so I don't really like it. So I like to keep it at speed 3. So I would suggest that, but if you're comfortable with a different speed, use that. You may want to adjust the speed depending on certain parts as well. But for this first boss, just anchor the pod and just shoot the pod right at his core, and it'll stick into his core and anchor into him. And it has the benefit of not only destroying the boss very quickly, but it charges up the pod too, so you can use your Delta weapon. Once you absorb enough damage into your pod that you have on the front of your ship, you will get the Delta weapon once it reaches 100%. The Delta weapon is fired by pressing triangle. It's a screen clearing attack. Once you waste it, you do have to wait for it to charge back up fully again, which may take a few lives. It does carry over on deaths and continues, but you have to wait until you fill it back up to use it again. I usually save it for the end of a checkpoint that I'm having trouble on. I'll save it up, and I'll use it at the end just to get me through farther than I got last time, And eventually I'm able to break through to the next checkpoint. Once you have the unlimited continues, you will start at whatever checkpoint you get to. You'll never be sent back to the beginning of the stage once you get to a new checkpoint. And you'll have unlimited continues, so you can just keep working on it until you get through. Some of these checkpoints took hours, though. Very, very difficult game overall. Part of that difficulty is because the screen is so grainy. It's not clear like the 2D R-type games. So all that graininess makes it very hard sometimes to see what can damage you. There's also a lot of bullshit on screen for decoration that doesn't actually hurt you. But it can trick you into moving out of the way and hitting into other shit. So there's a lot to try to discern, a lot of chaos on screen that can be a pain in the ass. It makes it harder, I think, than the other R-type games that I played. I still have to beat Super R-type and the original R-type probably one of these days, and some of the other ones, but I found this one to be especially difficult because of that, the graininess of the screen, and sometimes the hit detection is a little weird. I would much prefer the 2D style, cleaner 2D style R-type, or if they're going to do it in 3D, I would of course want it on a more modern system, but this was what was available at the time for 3D graphics. So for a lot of these parts, it's going to be just memorizing the path. You're gonna learn how to get through these parts by just dying a lot. So, it's just going to be a matter of finding what path works for you, what enemies you need to clear out, and which ones you can, leave alive. It's really just trial and error. The path you use might be slightly different than what you see me doing. So I'm probably not going to break down every step of what I do in the actual checkpoints because it would be difficult to really do that. So yeah, the way I edited this video, I also have a no commentary version of this video up with no commentary. It's the same video. There's no differences to it except for you can hear the sound of the game instead of my voice. But the way I edited it was I left the first death in of each checkpoint I got to. So if I died on a checkpoint, which I died on most of the checkpoints in the game, you'll see that first death. And then the rest of the deaths will be edited out, obviously. Now, for the beginning of each stage, I didn't show the death on the first checkpoint of each stage because there's no transitions that I have to show. If I were to edit the deaths out of the checkpoints, then you have these awkward transitions where the ship just disappears and reappears, in the checkpoint areas, and it looks kind of odd. I have done that before, but I've been moving away from that style of editing because I think this is more easier to see the transitions. But yeah, for the beginning of each stage, there's a lot of times I died a lot on the first checkpoint of a stage, but you won't see any deaths shown there. It'll just show the first successful attempt I had on that part. But there was a lot of deaths because it was about 9.5 hours of playing the game and dying before I beat all the segments. This part is quite hard. It's good to have this pod on the back of your ship so these things run into you. And I like to use the Delta weapon right about here with all these nests up here. I find it makes it a lot easier to make this final push through this area. You can always charge up your Delta weapon again, so it's not a huge deal if you waste it. You just may have to go through several lives and die a few times before you charge it back up to 100% again. Then you can use it by hitting triangle. Of course, you can shoot the pod off of your ship and latch it onto things. That's how we defeated the first boss. And it's also good to use it, to press it up against the enemies to charge it up a little bit. But yeah, now there's another checkpoint here with these fish. This is not a hard checkpoint. So, actually, no, I guess I got to the next area. I guess that was good enough to break into the next area. Sometimes the checkpoints are weird. So yeah, for this boss, stay up here and kind of grind it with your pod and the thing here, and then just use the front pod again to kind of grind this caterpillar to death. That's all you really need to do. It's just positioning. You can see exactly what I did. I was kind of up right underneath the crab's mouth and kind of grinding it with that upper pod that you get. You get to pick that up right at the checkpoint, so you'll have all that shit. So just grind it until it dies, and use the pod and the upper kind of pod. I guess it's called the bit module. Use both of those to kind of grind the boss to death. Then move down and anchor your pod to that caterpillar if you can, or just grind it with that. Just make sure you dodge the shit that it shoots at. It's real easy if you do it that way. Otherwise, it can go on for a little while. This part can be tricky. I like to initially anchor my pod right into the turret gun here, and it'll destroy this thing. That way you don't have to worry about getting shot by that gun anymore. It makes it a lot easier. If you want, you can clear out the extra panels on there. It doesn't really matter. Soon we're going to be going underneath this thing, and this part can be a pain in the ass. It's definitely memorization with where to move, basically. It's not really that hard when you know what to do, but it's a little tricky at first to figure out. But after watching the video, you don't really have to figure it out. You just do what I did. Keep the pod on the front, that way you can kind of shield yourself from all these enemies that appear on the right side of the screen without any warning. There's not a lot of room to move. So yeah, once you see this leg make a large movement, that's when you're going to creep underneath it. You want to take out this burner first, so anchor your pod onto the burner and it'll destroy it a lot faster than just shooting at it. Shoot at it as well, of course, to speed the process up. Get that power up if you want it. The laser is always good. The red laser is good because it's like one of the more powerful moves. So getting those red power-ups are usually pretty good for most parts. Now for this part, stay in the back, and then, I like using the Delta weapon to clear this thing out because it's annoying. The red lasers won't hurt you from this thing, but it's showing where it's going to fire at. And once they turn blue, it'll kill you. So you can trigger it to fire, but just move out of the way. Make sure you keep moving forward or back to get out of the way of it. This thing does take a lot of hits, so, anchor your pod on there if you can and use your Delta weapon. I like to use it there. You don't have to. But soon you're going to get the next checkpoint, so you don't really have to worry about saving it up. You do, of course, want to make sure you took out any, the gun that was behind you. I think there was a gun behind as well that you had to take out. So if you see me take that, I'll take it out. And then this is pretty much the next checkpoint. This is the last checkpoint of the stage. And it can be pretty tricky. The main concern here is going to be dodging these things that are descending down. So just keep an eye on them. And you get a little protection pod here, a bit pod, for your upper level here. So use that to kind of shield yourself from these dropping things. I decided to keep the red laser. It's more useful than the yellow power-up. I guess I did end up getting a yellow one, but I probably shouldn't have. I think the red power-up is better for this part. But I think I was just grabbing whatever appeared. I guess I didn't care too much about what weapon I had. I was mostly using this anchor to latch it on this shit to destroy it. So that's what you'll see me doing a lot. That's why I really like this ship, because it has that anchor. The other ships don't have a pod like that can anchor onto bosses and enemies. Okay, yeah, that was my first death. So that may have been why I wasn't using the best weapons, because that was my first time getting to the checkpoint and dying. As I said, I left that footage in, so it makes the transitions a lot clearer. You can really see where the checkpoints are in the levels, which I think is useful to somebody who wants to beat the game and see how the game works. And some of my other videos, like my Gunsmoke playthrough that I did a tutorial of for the arcade, which is a brutal game. It took about 25 hours to beat, and in that game I actually edited the deaths straight out of the checkpoints to where you would see my character kind of pop into an area, and it makes the transitions a lot more awkward. So if I ever do complete my very hard run of Gunsmoke, I'll probably edit it a little bit different. Because I'm playing the arcade version on very hard now, which is probably going to be a project that I'm going to play on and off. But I'll probably edit it to where I show the first death of each checkpoint. I think that's a better way to do it. So I may be doing that for a lot of my videos moving forward for these types of games. So yeah, anchor your pod in this area and try to destroy all these guns. Just keep anchoring your pod back in that area and just sucking the life out of those guns and stay back and, dodge. This thing is very easy. It shows where the green lasers are going to shoot out at. You just look where the red lasers are pointed, and that's where the green lasers are going to follow. So just keep an eye on that and stay in the gaps. Use your anchor again and anchor it onto this thing. I didn't quite get it anchored. My thing was floating around a lot, but it doesn't seem to really stick to that too well. But just keep that pod in there. It'll do a lot of damage. And you'll probably have your Delta weapon ready, which I recommend using for this part because it's kind of hard to reach this thing down here. So I just used the Delta. By using a Delta, you can take that thing out without having to actually get down there and try to fight it or put yourself in a compromised position. I noticed in this game a lot of times you can touch the walls as well, which you can't do in a lot of shooters. So that is useful to keep in mind, that the walls won't necessarily hurt you. It's good to know exactly what you need to avoid. Of course, with all the clutter on screen, this game makes it difficult to do that because it's very grainy. I probably should have played it on an emulator with a graphic filter to smooth everything out. It might have helped. But I didn't want to restart the game. Plus, some of those emulators with the graphic filters are a little bit less stable. Sometimes they crash. I have one emulator in particular I use that has a really good graphics filter, but it sometimes doesn't work right. So yeah, for this part you're going to make your way up. And obviously just kill what you need to and avoid the debris. These guys can be pretty aggressive. Luckily, this is the kind of game that you can pretty much memorize. If you play it enough and die enough, you can memorize where to move. It's always the same as far as I can tell. So, this is a game you can completely learn and you can memorize. And that's what you got to do. You got to you got to memorize and carve your own paths through the levels and find, all right, I can move here, I can move there. And you just have to remember exactly where you went. And, you just build off of that. If you were able to go in one corner and sit there for a few seconds, well, you know you can do that. And that'll work next time. But then you need to find out, where do I go next, So you have to adjust your strategies and just keep playing trial and error until you learn exactly where to move and what to kill, etc. You have your Delta weapon, which can get you out of some really hard situations. So if you need to use that, you can. You don't want to expand it too early in a checkpoint, though, because you may need it at the end of a checkpoint. A lot of times at the end of the checkpoints, there's some really hard bullshit that happens, and I like using it on the harder parts. You can, of course, build it back up if you waste it, but it does take several deaths usually to build it up. And on some checkpoints, it takes quite long to build it up because there's not a lot of things that you can absorb with it to build it back up. So, things to keep in mind. As I said, I like to keep the speed on 3 for the ship. It's one of the triggers. There's like 2 trigger buttons, I believe, or bumper buttons, like R1 or something like that adjust your speed. So I always pretty much always set it to 3 at the start of the checkpoints. I don't know if I was doing that this early in the game, if I was keeping it at speed 3, but later I found that was the best speed for me. Pretty much for every part. You can use your anchor here to anchor onto these guys and kill them faster, obviously. I may have left in several deaths for this part. I may have missed that, because I don't think that was the next checkpoint. But you can see this is an irritating part. You also have a lightning move where you charge your shot and you can shoot out this lightning, which is really good for the weaker enemies especially. It takes a lot of them out if you charge it long enough. It's where it says beam on the bottom. It's your charge button. You have a button where you can fire rapidly by holding it down, and you have another button where you can charge your shot. And if you charge it enough with this ship, you'll get a nice lightning attack that's good at clearing out smaller enemies. I probably should have even been using it on here. I wasn't using it a lot by this point in the game, but I do end up using it a lot later when I realized the usefulness of the move. Actually, there's times when I was just using the lightning shot and not even the regular shot. So it is something to experiment with. This checkpoint is tough. This one took me a while. You're also going to see me starting at the checkpoints with no starting power-up, so you're going to be seeing it exactly the way that you're going to have to beat it when you play the game. And obviously, if you know the game well, you're not going to have to start back at the checkpoints because you'll just beat it without dying. So, you know, for that, you won't need this video. So yeah, I like to go up on this left side here. After a lot of experimentation, I found this left side to be the best initially. And then I move on over to this right side through this path. And you're going to want to follow the exact path I take if you're wanting to do it the way I did it here. You may find a better path, but, you know, for the purpose of this tutorial, for what I did, this is how I did it. And it worked well for me. I was still saving up the Delta weapon. I don't think I had it fully charged here, but if you need to, you could, of course, use it earlier. I could have used it on... I think I was saving it for the boss. Or, yeah, actually, on this attempt, I didn't even have it fully charged, as I said. So, yeah, I guess I was... I'll probably get it during the boss fight. So, yeah, this is a very easy boss. I may have beaten this the first time I got to it. Just dodge the missiles. I don't believe the ship in the background really hurts you. I was trying to avoid it anyway because I didn't know how this worked. It may hurt you when it pops out fully, but I'm not sure. I was trying to avoid it, so I didn't really test that too much. If you can, you want to anchor your pod into the boss like you see me doing. That does huge damage. See, once you get that on there, it took him out pretty fast. So that's really the way to take it out faster, is to anchor that pod on there. And see, if you don't have this ship, you can't do that kind of shit. So it really does speed up the boss fights. So yeah, this starts off with a difficult checkpoint. But this game starts getting pretty consistently hard by this point. I had success using the lightning charge. I don't always give it the full charge, but if you can charge it fully to the purple or pink where it says beam, you know, it's a powerful lightning attack that can clear out even these enemies pretty well. Even though they're bigger enemies that take more hits, it does a decent job at dealing with them. There's shit like this that's really ridiculous, as you see, and I use my Delta weapon on that last part. Some parts in the game can just be really ridiculous and hard to understand where the fuck you're supposed to even go. I'm sure it's a lot easier if you get here with, you know, all powered up. You can probably manage this shit a lot easier, but most of the time playing these games, unless you know the game, you're not going to be powered up at the checkpoints. So I think this is a useful tutorial because this is actually showing how to play the game from each checkpoint pretty much without any starting power-ups. If you watch a video online, there's usually no commentary on the game, and it's usually just someone who's mastered the game and doesn't die. Or it could be a cheated run. There's a lot of cheated runs of various games on YouTube. So, World at Long Plays, you know, notoriously cheats their videos. They don't like to mention that too much. So yeah, this was my first death on this checkpoint. This is a very hard checkpoint as well, I believe. Yeah, this one took me a while. I remember this one. I completed this game about a day or two, but I didn't edit it until today, so now I'm doing the commentary. I like to go between that gap and kind of sit here and then move back around, but again, this is kind of hard to explain without actually playing and seeing what path works for you. I saved the delta weapon because I think there's a part where I want to use it because it gets really fucking dense. So I saved that up for a little bit later in this checkpoint. Even though it took a lot of trial and error to survive to this point. This is a very hard checkpoint. So this may, don't be surprised if it takes you an hour or a few hours just to do this checkpoint. It may. One thing to keep in mind is when you destroy these snakes, make sure you do not destroy them when they are close to the left edge of the screen where you're at. Because they do explode when you destroy them, and then you have to get in between the debris of this dead snake. So do not kill a snake when it's right on top of you. That's going to save you a lot of trouble. It's common sense, but I mean, it is easy to overlook that if you're just playing kind of mindlessly. Now, this is another very, very hard checkpoint. One of the harder checkpoints in the game. So, very, very heavy memorization here. You can only get so far by reacting in this part. It's really going to be a lot of memorization. You want to clear out all these little gun guys that are on these rotating bars before you try to go through the middle. You see how I died there. But this is one of the examples of when there's so much shit in the background and grainy visuals that it makes it very easy to get hit by shit. So you got to wait to a certain time before you go between those poles that are rotating. So you got to get used to when to move through them just by memorizing it. It's the same every time. You just got to memorize it. And you can, of course, watch when I move. But yeah, so try to clear out all these guys that are on these little rotating bars before you go through here. You want to go through when you see me do it. Then you got to go all the way down and kind of back up in little increments to back up through those guys. And you can do it pretty safely without getting hit. But yeah, it is hard to explain. And I ended up leaving in a few extra deaths I can see. Because I didn't check over this video after I edited it, so there's probably going to be a few extra deaths shown. But I mean, that's okay for a tutorial. Because it kind of shows the difficulty of this segment. So yeah, you're going to want to clear those guys out on the bottom pole, mainly. These little gun guys. And then you want to move, you want to kind of back through slowly. And then after you do that, this is a lot of memorization of where to be and where to move. It's really hard to try to, describe each step of what I'm doing here, but there is a tricky part near the end of these rotating poles where it makes you kind of think to go to the back of the screen and then you get trapped and killed by the pole, that spinning pole. So there's a part where you kind of got to zigzag and go in the middle of the poles. Now, I save my delta for this part every time. I find it insanely difficult without the delta weapon. I don't even know how to do it. Unless you just keep pausing the game and try to go through each bullet, but it's insanely difficult. So save the delta weapon for that very end part. Don't use it before that. You want to save it for that part where those two poles are kind of coming down and creating a ceiling and floor where it kind of traps you in. And then you want to use your delta weapon to clear out all those guns. So now you're at the boss checkpoint. This is a very difficult boss. I mean, not this particular boss. This one is easy enough. You want to kind of just get all the power-ups and then stay up here. And just kind of make small movements to dodge the bullets and kill the main. You want to destroy the main little pod here to beat this boss. So you'll see. So the first thing you want to do is, get all the power-ups that you can initially. Stay at the top and just shoot, and then just move to the right real fast. Grab them all. And yeah, and then you're just going to kind of sit at the top area where you see me sitting, like up here above these things, where the gap is, and just make small movements. And just take them out. And the more of them you take out, the easier it is, because that pod right there cannot fire bullets. It's just there for you to destroy. If you wait long enough, I think the bosses will leave in this game, to some extent. I wasn't able to do it on another boss, but I think some of the bosses will actually leave if you don't kill them in time. I actually have the final form actually leave the game, which was odd. So for this guy, we're going to use this pod here, latch it on, get up in this upper left corner, and be very aware that the snake shoots out these purple things that come off of the segments of it, which is a pain in the ass, so just be aware of that. Now shoot this anchor into it again from your back. Have it on your back of your ship and shoot it into this thing. Now you're just going to have to survive this. Now move all the way to the right when you have a chance. It makes it safer. See, all the way to that right corner. And now you're going to be making your way back down again. And now you're going to reapply the anchor to the final form of this little boss here. When it kind of gets deformed. And you just got to survive for a little while and then it'll die. The anchor will kill it. Now this is the hardest part of the boss fight. This is a very hard part. Start off by taking out this burner with your anchor by shooting it from the back, shooting it onto that thing. And try to take out the guns you can by having this thing mounted on your back. If you have the laser's good. Now shoot your anchor into this little engine here. This is the main thing you have to destroy to beat this form of the boss. Watch out for all that blue shit it shoots out. You can use your little blue beam here that kind of moves around. It's attached to your pod. And you can kind of use that to shield yourself from some of the blue shots. What you want to do is keep shooting that anchor onto the engine part. And if you survive long enough, then you will just beat it anyway because the boss will just leave. That's what happened to me. I didn't even beat this in time. But yeah, you cannot shield from those red flame shots. You have to just dodge them because the shield will not absorb those. They're too strong. And I believe that's the same thing for those blue shots. I don't know if those blue shots can be absorbed. No, actually they can. The blue shots can be absorbed, but there's so many of them, you just want to get away from that engine thing and not be too close to it. Or use that blue rope that's attached to your pod to kind of shield yourself. But this is a tough part. It takes a lot of memorization of where to be. I recommend using save and load states to practice each segment individually. So use a save state at the beginning of this part and just practice this until you got it memorized. You're going to want to memorize all 3 sections so that you can do that because, of course, you can't die. There's no checkpoints on any of the segments. So that is a very hard part. So yeah, this is the semi-final stage. And this has some very hard parts from what I remember. This part's pretty difficult starting out because you have these things that go in the ceiling and floor, which are kind of a pain in the ass. I like using the anchor immediately on them, latching it onto them and staying away from them, and trying to take them out. And then I do the same thing again to the second one that appears, all while avoiding all these other, enemies. Use your charge shots too. The lightning does clear shit out pretty good, so use that. This area gets a little fucking dense here. There's a lot of shit that you get crammed into this narrow area. So I used my delta weapon here. And then latch on the anchor onto the enemy. So yeah, things are getting kind of intense here. This goes on for a little while. It's not an easy first checkpoint. So so this was the checkpoint. So yeah, I start off in that left corner and I shoot all those green things, and then I move down at the last second, and then I come in this tunnel here. You're going to want to shoot the pod backwards to take out these bouncing brains. You have to continually fire rapid fire in front of you to take out the walls as well. And then for this, you're going to kind of want to block this shit as seen and move when you can. But I use the delta weapon to get into position here. See, right here I use the delta weapon because otherwise it's ridiculous to get above this thing. So this was my technique. This is where I use the delta weapon. And then once I'm up here, it's very dangerous because these brains just kind of come down from the top of the ceiling and they can easily land right on top of you. So you've got to be really careful with that. You also want to latch on your pod onto that ceiling crawler and take it out. Then you want to latch your pod immediately onto the back of this thing when it's open, when you can see it on the screen. Latch your anchor onto it and just kind of dodge and try to survive. It's very, very hard. But once you destroy this thing, you have a lot more room to move around. So move around, try to survive. Use your delta weapon again. You want to try to get it charged the second time for that part. So use it again. Now surviving a little bit longer, you get to the checkpoint. This is the checkpoint right here. So I'm just kind of barely making it to this checkpoint before I die. Once you see that little opening, the mechanical, walls here, the little tunnel, that's your checkpoint. So you just want to get to that point. But it's a very, very hard checkpoint, so it may take a while. This part's really not that hard. There's actually a really cheap fucking trick that you can use on the boss, make it pretty damn easy. But yeah, you want to clear out all those enemies before you exit that tunnel from this checkpoint, because there's a lot of enemies. Then for this, I use my delta weapon every time to clear out those guys. I don't know how else to do it with base power-ups. So, if you don't have delta weapon, charge it up and use it on that part. This is very easy. Just shoot your anchor pod onto this little mini-boss. And just stay out of its way. And eventually the pod will just kill it. Now for this part, you're definitely going to want to use save and load states to practice your positioning a little bit. But it's very easy when you use this method. So wait till this little stomach thing changes color to a lighter blue. And stay behind and now latch on your anchor to it. Now get up in this little corner right here. And just sit here for pretty much the entire boss fight. Once you do this, you're pretty much good. So sit up here. And, you can fire your charge shot if you want every once in a while, but I don't think it really does anything because you're too close to the boss. I do it anyway, but just let your pod destroy the first form. And now latch the pod onto the back of your ship, move down just slightly. It's a very slight movement. And now you're going to be grinding out this mouth part of the boss, which is the final form. And you're not going to be able to get hit, so just sit here. And when your delta weapon is available, you can use it as well if you want, but you don't need to. You can save your delta weapon for the next area. You really don't need to use it here. But if you want to speed it up a little bit, you can fire it off. But yeah, once you know these positions, it's very easy. But it can be a little tricky because it's a tight positioning. So it's a little tricky to get. It may take you a few tries. When I was initially practicing this, I was not doing enough damage. And the boss was actually starting to move off screen, but it was moving too close to me and it would just kill me. So you do have to kill it within a certain amount of time. But if you get plenty of time to do it, as long as you're doing that technique that I show there, it's a very, very easy boss. Otherwise, it's probably extremely difficult, I'm sure. But I didn't try fighting it normally. I was trying to exploit it from the beginning. So this is the final stage. And the level itself is really not that difficult. But the final boss is very, very hard. So a lot of this level is going to be quite easy until you get to the last checkpoint. The last checkpoint itself is really not that hard as far as the stage goes. And the semi-final boss is actually pretty easy as well. Quite easy. But the final form is very, very hard. So that's going to be the part that's probably going to get a lot of people stuck. And I will try to explain it the best I can. But it's going to be about memorization. And I can say what that final form is, when I was playing it for a while, I could not see a clear path at all. It just seemed like a fuckfest. I would just get destroyed. Because you have to find a path through these little red sperm, and I was not able to find the path for a long-ass time. Then maybe after an hour or so, it started to click for me. So you may have to sit on that boss with save and load states for a while and just practice it to find the path. So if it's not immediately clear, don't stress out about it. Just put the time in. Keep playing it and keep trying to find the path. Eventually, it'll probably click for you, and then you'll be able to do it. Initially, it may seem impossible or nearly impossible, but it's very doable. There is somewhat of a pattern to it. You just have to get used to the way the little sperms fucking move. You'll start to memorize where the gaps are and how to move. But it's going to take some time. And I'll go into more detail about that when I get there. I didn't have too much trouble with these early parts. I actually died a few times on the very first checkpoint of the stage, but after that I kind of cruised through to the last checkpoint of the stage. So no, use your pod to kind of clear these things out a little bit and just stay away from them. But I found this part to be pretty easy compared to the previous checkpoints. I thought it was kind of like a break from the other areas. After how hard some of those other areas were, this was pretty fucking easy. But soon we will be at the final checkpoint of the game, and that may take you some hours. Depends on your skill level. It probably took me like 2 hours to beat the last checkpoint. But if you don't practice the last boss with save and load states, it's probably going to take you a lot longer than 2 hours. But again, it really depends on your level of skill and how fast you are at learning these kind of games. It may take you longer, it may take you shorter. So this is the final checkpoint. And this checkpoint really isn't too hard until you get to the final boss. But the problem is that you do have to do this shit. Every time you die on the final boss, you have to redo all this, in this checkpoint. So just to get one try at the final form, you're going to have to go through this whole checkpoint each time. But eventually it will, it'll be pretty easy after you've done it enough times. It's not that hard. So use your lightning here. I like using my lightning mostly in this area to clear out the sperm. You see I'm mostly only using the lightning pretty much at this point. I find the lightning to be the most effective thing. I don't even use regular shots, I don't think, in this part. You want to shoot those little nut sacks and extract the babies and then destroy them in the crystal if you can. If you can just drive past them, then do that. But I like destroying them to get them out of the way. Now here's your first boss. It's like probably the first form of the last boss, and it's quite easy. But it can be easily to get caught on the screen and die. So the goal here is to shoot at the big red mass, and the more you shoot it, the smaller it gets. It starts to shrink until eventually it dies. Just keep an eye of where these beams are shooting at, and reattach this thing to your back of your ship and start shooting it from the back. And then when you need to, reattach it to the front and shoot it from the front. That's all. Very easy. Just make sure that when you reattach your pod, you do it at an opportune moment, not when there's shit that's in your way. Wait till you're about to transition to the next side before you switch your pod up. Because if you're messing around trying to get the pod on your ship while you're up at the top or bottom parts, you're probably going to end up getting sloppy and taking damage or dying. But once this thing shrinks enough, then it will go to the next phase. This is usually where I kill it every time. Make sure you get the red laser as well. You want to have the red laser power up for this thing because it does the most damage, I think, of all the power-ups. So now is the final form of the boss. This is the hardest part, one of the hardest parts of the game. It's very difficult, but it is totally learnable. So if you play it enough, you will learn it, but just use save states and practice the shit out of it. Practice it for as long as you need to. But my technique is to stay all the way at this left side initially. I wait for the stuff to start coming out, and I just inch to the right side. Then I wait for my opening, and I inch back to the left. And what I'm doing is I'm charging up my lightning attack fully to the full pink. And then I release it, and it gives me enough room just to move. And I keep moving from left to right and then back left again. You see, I keep doing that pattern. And then when it gets really hard is when the screen starts to move up. It kind of changes everything. So you want to continue moving left to right, but you want to find that sweet spot in the middle of these things. You don't want to be too high up or too far down, or they'll spawn on you and instantly kill you. So you need to kind of stay in the middle of them at all times. There's a sweet spot. And then you're going to move left and right again as you've been doing. And then you got to move all the way around to the front of this thing. And you're going to sit there a little bit longer, and then your delta move will be fully charged up, and that's when you release it. When you start this fight, it resets your delta move. So you have zero delta power. So you have to basically survive until your delta reaches 100%, and then you have to hit triangle to unleash it immediately. You want to unleash it immediately because you don't want to have to do that part any longer than you have to. So be ready to unleash it when it fills up to 100. But yeah, that part can take a lot of practice. But the general idea, like I said, is you're going to kind of inch from left to right and then back left again. And you want to use your lightning to clear out the sperm as needed. Initially, it's going to seem insane, like there's no openings. And it's going to feel random when you make it through those sperm. But after you practice enough, you're going to start to see the openings where you can move through. It'll start to make more sense. It's not something that can be clearly explained, really. But if you practice it enough, you're going to start to see the opening for it. And then the hard part is going to be most likely is when you have to move around when the screen starts moving up. Because what happens is, if you go too far up on the screen, it's bullshit. The enemies seem to just spawn on you. It's almost like there's a ceiling, and you just die. A lot of times I died. I don't even know how I died, but I'm guessing they spawned right on top of me. So it can be very cheap. But it is learnable. I was able to do it pretty consistently, like at least getting to the end of it after some practice, after about an hour of practice on just that part. So it's doable, but it's going to take some practice. If you have any questions, let me know, and thanks for watching.